Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm Heather Crimson with my podcast co-host Vanessa Baldwin, and we have a very special guest with us today, Dr. Stephen Hussey. We are so excited that he was able to join us. He's a very, very busy doctor. He actually wrote a book, and it is called Understanding the Heart: Surprising Insights into the Evolutionary Origins of Heart Disease and Why It Matters. Thank you, Vanessa. And he is a chiropractor and a functional medicine practitioner. And I'm going to also just assume that you're maybe writing more stuff. So he's an author, published once. He is in demand educator and public speaker. And I've been following you, Dr. Hussey, for so long. I can't remember where I found you, but it could have been through Weston A. Price. But I just knew right away. I'm like, oh, this person is he's like in the right paradigm for me and busting myths and bringing the truth about our body. And I know you're going to share your journey of how you have come into the places of knowing that you are now. But welcome so much. I'm so grateful to have you on the show.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the invite. It's always fun to talk about these things.
Yeah, thank
Melissa, you have a great list of questions. Do you want to start us off, or do you want to give them
yeah. I just want to say, Dr. Hussey, I love that you just really embody the lifestyle and you bring it on Instagram and wherever you're sharing any podcast I ever listened to. In fact, my brother was one of the ones who inspired me. He's like, you got to get Dr. Hussey on because he's super into podcasts too. And he listened to your episode on Ben Greenfield, and I was like, oh my God, yeah, Dr. Hussey is awesome. Like we were just like, I was like, yes. Cause I've been listening to you, watching you for a while. And he inspired me to reach out. So shout out to him. But anyway, like anytime I ever listen to you, I'm like, yes. Like you ever like listen to a podcast and you like speak out loud? Like I do that. I'm like, yes, that's right. And you're just doing all the things. So yeah, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah, so let's start with, of course, I want to know what prompted you to get interested in heart health, right? Like, so, I kind of have an idea, but I want you to share that with the audience. Like, why study the heart, you know?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I got interested in health, I was forced into it because of health issues I had as a kid. I was, there's that saying that's like, if you don't make time for your wellness, you'll be forced to make time for your illness. And before I even had a chance to know that saying or think like an adult at 9, or even at 2 years old, I had chronic conditions, asthma, allergies. I used to break out in chronic hives all over my body, and the doctors were like, "Well, we don't know why." And irritable bowel syndrome, just lots of things like that. And then ultimately ended up with type 1 diabetes at age 9. And so my parents and I were just, trying to manage these things, and with, Western medicine, that was kind of the only option we knew. And so, that was the key word. They're helping me manage them. Nobody was telling me why they were happening or anything like that. And so, yeah, it wasn't until college that I started figuring out that the way I lived my life had a direct impact on my ability to manage these things and how I felt and things like that. And I just thought that it was interesting that I never heard that from any physician that I've been to ever, even ones that I really respected and liked, like my pediatric endocrinologist. He was a great guy, great with kids. But now I see that, the paradigm that he was in was wrong. So I was like, well, that's interesting, because I was kind of dead set on becoming a physician because of that relationship. And then I was kind of like, well, and I had a really, strong-headed girlfriend at the time. She was very much into like, you have to do this, you have to do that. Like, don't, she, was guiding me in that direction. So I was finding out all these things, and I was like, well, maybe I don't want to be a physician. And but ended up, settling on more holistic type of physician, even though what I learned in chiropractic school is still very incomplete. Mm-hmm. It was more along the lines of what I wanted to do. So I went to chiropractic school, continued learning, and since I'm type 1 diabetic, I got rid of all the other things I had through these lifestyle changes. But type 1's kind of this collateral damage. And there's many theories as to why it happens and what goes on there. But it predisposed me to heart disease, or mainly just disease of the vascular system. So small capillaries just get damaged first because of blood sugars. Because no matter how hard I try, my blood sugars are never going to be as stable as someone who's not diabetic. And so I just kind of always tuned in when I heard things about the vascular system or things I was learning about it. And then eventually just started researching everything I could about health in general, because I got passionate about health, but specifically the heart and heart disease and the vascular system. And I found a lot of things that blew my mind. Some things I just dismissed as crazy at first because of this, preconceived education that I had, this formal education. But then I'd read something else down the line and be like, well, maybe that wasn't so crazy, that last thing I read. And it just slowly over time became this, this knowledge that I had that started to make more and more sense, especially when I started to study life in general, not just healthcare or medicine or anything, but like, why life is here on this earth and how it came to be and all those things. And then all the stuff I learned that I thought was crazy made more sense. And so it's just been this long journey of trying to figure out how best to live in this modern world that we've created to create health. And, so like I said, I've gotten rid of all diseases except for type 1. And then, I guess despite my best efforts, in early 2020, I had a heart attack. And I think that there were many reasons why that happened. And I outlined them in a talk I gave. It's on my YouTube channel called The Heart Attack Survival Story. But ultimately, it came down to stress and, an acute situation. There was acute inflammation where a clot formed in my artery. And, the fluctuating blood sugars under that stress didn't help. So all these things kind of predisposed me to it. But, now it was kind of it's something that I wish, didn't happen, obviously, but it did. And I've learned a lot from it, and I've gone different directions since then, learned a ton more. And it also made me experience the system that doesn't work firsthand. Because before I'd heard a lot about it and had my own experiences with Western medicine from other, from type of like endocrinology points of view and autoimmune inflammatory type points of view. But this was my direct experience with a cardiovascular approach to that Western medicine has that does not work, based on it being the still leading cause of death, despite, the latest drugs and latest surgeries and procedures. And so the things I've figured out help me understand why it doesn't work. But being a direct, a patient in that system almost made me like empathize and like be able to relate to people who are in that system, stuck in that system, because now I know what they're feeling. And so, there were, I guess, some positives from this negative thing that happened. And what I've learned since then, I'm confident it'll never happen again. There was things I wasn't paying attention to before that I need to now. And I've kind of made it, I guess, my mission to share that with people so that they can benefit from that, what I found as well.
Yeah, I love that part of your book where you shared your experience at the hospital because, yeah, especially when you know so much that and then you're educated and you push back, and then they make you feel like you don't know anything. Like I felt that my own friend before, like, oh, you don't like well, we're better, we're higher, we know this is what you have to do. There's no other way, there's no other choice, and it's like, I don't agree with that. There are other ways and other choices, and you prove that. You didn't take all their medications that they recommended, and you use other modalities like nature and sauna and all the other things to help you, heal your heart. And I just commend you for adding that to the book. That's huge. It was really
When you
great.
push back against their paradigm, you get a lot of interesting rigidity in response, because not only are you in their eyes perhaps challenging their knowledge base, but also they don't have the other framework. They can't, there's no, they think it's all maybe hogwash, but they also just don't have that perspective to even field your questions sometimes, right? Like the doctor who said he can't talk about magnesium with you, which is like, that's a pretty fundamental mineral, you know what I mean? But you didn't just have any heart attack. Like I remember reading that you had a certain kind, I forget the name of it, but it's a very, it can be more fatal than others, so to speak. What was it?
It's definitely the more serious form of a heart attack. It's called a STEMI heart attack, where there's non-STEMI, and there's also Minoka heart attacks where there's no obstruction whatsoever. But mine was a very acute clot formation. When they went in to bust the clot, they didn't see any other atherosclerosis anywhere. They just saw a giant clot that formed. And I had a CAC score that was done 6 months prior that showed zero calcification of arteries, which doesn't mean there wasn't any soft plaque, but yeah, so there was very little vascular damage, which tells me that this was a very acute insult to the injury, or to injury to the lining of the artery, that happened because of the situation that I was in. Various things about that caused that insult. So and then a clot formed. I mean, that's exactly what the body's supposed to do in the case of that injury. It's just that the environment was wrong, and in that situation, it was big enough clot that it blocked arteries, which is not a good thing. And so that's a result of, though, like the environment that artery was in, not necessarily, the body doing something wrong.
I love that you clarified that, because that's helpful. Otherwise, it can get confusing. Like, oh, your body's making a mistake. No, it's just the context, right?
Mhm.
And it's so interesting that it sounded also like it really puzzled the medical staff, because they were expecting to see all this other stuff, like you said, the atherosclerosis and whatnot, and you had nothing, and all your prior scores were good. So yeah, this is definitely, there's something else going on.
Yeah, and like you say, when I pushed back a little bit, and I didn't do so in an aggressive way, I was just like, well, what about this? What about that? And their clear lack of knowledge about those subjects meant that, to me, they weren't an expert. They were just functioning within a system that gave them a cookie cutter approach to the thing that I had. And I'm very thankful that, they were able to intervene, and I'm still here today. But the care after the fact shows that they have a fundamental misunderstanding, or lack of understanding of what the heart is, how the vascular system actually works, and those types of things. And I guess I don't blame them or anything for getting uncomfortable and being like, oh, we don't know. But I think I read a quote recently by Thomas Kuhn that was like to reject a paradigm without simultaneously replacing it with another paradigm is denying science. So to reject this paradigm that cholesterol causes heart disease without replacing it with something else, which is kind of what happened to me, because I did reject that paradigm and I had the evidence to suggest that I should reject it, but I wasn't replacing it with something else, which I think is the quantum or circadian,
Right.
approach to things. And so that was kind of my mistake, my disconnect. But it's definitely theirs, because they're not even aware of a different paradigm, so all they have is the one paradigm. And so how could they reject that when that's all they know?
Right. Right.
They don't have any other option to think about anything else. So, I mean,
They're
I
very,
empathize with them, but it's still lackluster care, and not the whole picture. And people are, in my opinion, suffering because of it.
yeah, it's not a holistic viewpoint of the body in any sort of way. It's very linear. This is what you have, we take this, medications, it's very linear. And it's unfortunate that we do that. And the body never makes a mistake. It's always doing something for a reason. It's always wants to protect you. It always wants to keep you alive. And, again, I'm glad you pointed out too, grateful Western medicine has its place, life-saving emergencies, but the aftercare right there is the problem. They're not really, that's where the lack is. The chronic disease care, the aftercare, all of that is really where the main issue is. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but
Yeah.
hopefully over time, people like this will, other people listen to podcasts like this and ones you shared and read your book, and people will expand their knowledge base, and they'll, changes will happen. That's the hope, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There are some cardiologists that have read my book, and they
Awesome.
like it. So but they're the more open-minded ones, obviously. They've already come outside of, the I guess conventional wisdom that their profession provides them. So they were more receptive to it. But one cardiothoracic surgeon who read it was just like, I learned something. I learned why the pulse disappears whenever I do open heart surgery on somebody, and we put them on a, you know, a bypass, a perfusionist system. He's like, I learned why the pulse disappears when we do that, because we take away the whole, biophysics and biomechanical aspect of how blood does actually move.
Wow.
And he was like, I learned something. I was like, oh, cool.
That's
It's
great.
amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's amazing. They can learn a lot from your book. I really believe that. That's for sure. So yeah, first of all, actually, let's go to that a little bit, going into the book a little bit. One thing that is really like a surprise to many people, and they don't really, everybody thinks the heart is, a pump, and you kind of explain in your book how it's really not a pump like we've been taught. So maybe share that a little bit, because that's a very different shift, in the thinking of how the heart works.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's important to understand how this organ actually works, just so we can understand why things go wrong with it, right? Because if you don't understand how it works, then how could you possibly understand what goes wrong? And yeah, that's one of the biggest misunderstandings, is that the blood moves because the heart is this pressure propulsion pump that's forcefully taking in blood from the veins and forcefully pumping it out into the arteries. And that's not what happens. And there's plenty of scientific evidence that there's no way a heart the size of ours could actually do that. I mean, it does do a very small amount of pumping, but I wouldn't even call it pumping. I would do, it says it does a, I would say it does a small amount of vortexing, which is spiraling the fluid of blood as it moves through the chambers of the heart and kind of pushes it along through the chambers. But there's no way the heart could create enough force to move the blood throughout the entire arterial system. And then people will say, well, yeah, but the movement of our muscles helps blood move, and the one-way valves in the veins that prevent backflow, that's what does it. And it's like, well, yeah, all those things contribute, but the whole thing, all these things contribute to how blood moves, but there's other main ways that blood moves, especially when it gets out into the periphery, like into the real small vessels, because a capillary is it's smaller than the width of a red blood cell sometimes. So like, how does that red blood cell squeeze and get through there and move through there? How is it propelled through there? And there's various ways that it does that. And so, even like the early people, the first people to describe the vascular system had doubts that the heart was this pumping. I mean, it was contracting over here, so it looks like that. It's easy to think, oh yeah, that's what's happening. But in fact, it's not what's happening. So, how blood moves is structured water. So if people are familiar with structured water, like it's water that becomes not solid, not liquid, but kind of a midway. It's kind of like a gel. You can think of like Jello, or like the consistency of a raw egg white, that kind of gel-like consistency. And this structured water is what we're made of. The large majority of the water in our bodies is structured. It's just why like my tissues feel like gel. They don't feel like water. They don't slosh around like a waterbed and move around inside me like that. They're in this more structured state. But there is some fluid in the body, like the blood and the lymphatic system and the cerebral spinal fluid. And those fluids also have water in them. And water in those fluids will structure themselves onto biological surfaces, like the lining of arteries or the lining of lymph vessels. And when they do that, as long as we have enough energy to the system, that creates a situation where there's a charge separation. Like there's the structured water is very electronegative, and that pushes hydrogen ions that are very positive next to it, and they kind of line up next to it. So it creates a very positive negative charge separation. And they've actually shown that you can put in, two wires to power a light bulb into each side, and the light bulb turns on. So it creates energy to do this. And this energy in the vascular system, in the lymphatic system, is used to propel flow of fluid. And they've shown this in Dr. Pollock's lab at University of Washington, that this can actually happen. And it does actually happen in the vascular system of animals that they've tested in the lab. And so this is how blood moves. And so if you see that, well, there's other ways that blood moves too. There's also electrostatic properties, and there's paramagnetism, and there's different things, like things that are attracting the blood to it within the body, because the blood has iron. So that magnetic field will start attracting the blood to where it needs to go. There's different mechanisms and ways it moves, but the main way is the structured water. And so if you kind of accept that and you learn about that, then you think like, well, what is heart failure then? Right. So we call it heart failure, like, and we start to see pooling up of fluid, and we see the heart grow in size, and we see decreased ejection fraction from the heart and things like that. And it's like, oh, the heart's failing. Well, the heart's failing if you think of it as a pressure propulsion pump that's not doing its job. But if you understand that it's not a pressure propulsion pump and it acts more like a hydraulic ram, there's other mechanisms through which the blood is moving, then it's not the heart that's failing. It's the other mechanisms that are failing, putting more pressure on the heart to be a pressure propulsion pump, which is not supposed to be. And then that's straining the heart. So the heart's under stress, under strain in heart failure, but that's because other mechanisms are broken down. And so, yeah, so the heart is this vortexing hydraulic ram. And the reason that it's there, because like, why would it be there if it's not, forcefully pumping the blood around the body? The reason that it's there is for two reasons. One is that It's a vortex. So one way that you can energize water so that it structures itself more when it gets onto a hydrophilic surface is to swish it around or spiral it in the presence of oxygen. And there's always oxygen present in the blood. Even in the venous blood that's returning to the heart, it's still got a large percentage of oxygen to it. And so as it moves through, it gets energized as it moves through. And so then when it gets out into the arteries, it can structure itself. And that perform those mechanisms in moving the blood. And then the other reason it's there is because it's actually there for during times of exertion, it slows the flow of blood, which totally throws things on its head. Like we think it's propelling the blood, but it's slowing the flow of blood, especially during exertion. Because if during exertion, all my tissues were demanding all this blood, oxygen and nutrients in order to perform that, running or whatever we're doing or getting away from a threat or something, then all the blood would rush over to the arterial side and the venous side would collapse. There wouldn't be enough pressure. But because the heart is there and it slows the flow, but it helps maintain the pressure between the two systems so that doesn't happen.
Wow.
And so then we don't die because of exertion, right? It keeps the blood evenly dispersed or somewhat evenly dispersed so that we can maintain pressure between the two systems. And there's other things there too, like hydration is very important. As having enough fluid in the system itself is very important. But those are the two reasons the heart is there. That's what it's mainly doing. Well, there's a third reason too. It's because of the electromagnetic field that it has. But as far as the vascular system and like the hemodynamics of it, that's the reason the heart's there.
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, no, it's a very whole different way to look at the heart, right? And I love the vortexing part because you always think of like that vortexing is that, that energy to the water, and you think of like flowing water and in like, those beautiful like, rivers that I see you in and waterfalls, like all that happens in water like naturally, right? So of course that's happening in our body naturally, right? Like it just makes so much sense, and how that's part of energizing our body. And really like heart failure or heart issues or things like that are really it's a great, you can't just look at that one part of the body, right? It's a system that's going wrong, an energetic imbalance in our body that's really happening, right? We have to look at the bigger picture. So yeah, it's really really interesting stuff.
So wait, just to make sure I'm getting you, Dr. Hussey, like the heart, one of its functions is to structure our water. Yes.
Yes, yeah, contribute to the energizing of the water so that it will structure itself next to biological surfaces, whether that's going into a cell or on the lining of artery or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
And when you look at the heart, like there's a real fascinating YouTube video called The Helical Heart. That was like it was made in like 2001. And it's all these like, academics, so to speak, who are being interviewed about how this one guy, Francisco Torrent Quasp, found that the heart was just one continuous band of muscle wrapped up on itself. So when you have that electrical signal coming through the heart, the band of muscle, it travels in that spiral, like as it's wrapped up on itself. And so as the heart is contracting, it's doing that. It's spiraling. And they show this on imaging and everything that they call it the helical heart. It's a vortex. And there's a reason it's shaped like a football. It's not shaped like a basketball because it spirals like a football does when it contracts. And so when it's forced to be a pressure propulsion pump, it becomes more like a basketball because of that cardiomyopathy that we see in heart failure, because it's being forced to do that when it's not supposed to. And then we upregulate those mechanisms and we can reverse that and it becomes more like a football again. So it starts spiraling, the heart function gets better. So that, I mean, it's known within these academic circles that it's like that. It's just not acknowledged within Western medicine, which is because there's no money to be made from that. But yeah.
Well, there's no money to be made for also the ways that we can help our easy water, which is what our next question to go is. So if the easy water is a big part of, having a healthy heart, maintaining good, easy water in our body, how do you suggest people maintain healthy, easy water?
Yeah. Well, the main way, through Dr. Pollock's lab, the main, the way that they build the most exclusion zone water is infrared light. Especially the 3000 nanometer wavelength, which is the very, very end, far infrared, the highest wavelength of light we see from the sun. And so that builds easy the most. So infrared light would be the best thing. And 42% of the sun's rays are infrared at all times. So, that's the main source. That's why it makes sense evolutionarily, right? Is that the sun was always there. Now, the the thing that proves to me this idea that heart failure is not due to issues with the heart is because if you look at the studies on infrared light or infrared sauna use in people in heart failure, it's absolutely phenomenal. Like these people have, complete reversal of their condition if they use infrared saunas, because we're building structured water on the lining of the arteries. All of a sudden, the fluid's moving like it's supposed to. The heart doesn't have to work like a pump, and we see like increased ejection fractions. We see the heart go back to normal size. We see decreased swelling, all kinds of crazy stuff. We see healing of the lining of the artery because structured water also protects the lining of the artery, all because of infrared sauna use. And so like you can't really, even if the mechanism wasn't structured water, it's just like, okay, well, here's this thing that really helps people. Why isn't it being used within Western medical circles? Why isn't like in every cardiac rehab center in the world? Like why not? Because it's not profitable, obviously. But it just goes to show that was the problem in the first place, was that these mechanisms were broken down, and that's why the heart developed heart failure when really it should be like vascular failure or something like that. But yeah,
Failure is just a reaction to or response to the other parts of the body that are not to work well. And we look at the heart as the problem. And so the paradigm shift that you're helping everyone learn about is it's not something about the heart exclusively. Like that's the downfall or pitfalls of Western medicine, is this isolation, right? We're just gonna look at the heart only and not the context and the whole system, right? Holistically. So this is so helpful how you're describing is there's all these chain or these how do we say
Connections.
yeah, like this happens and then this happens and then this happens and then the heart is struggling. Well, what happened over here?
Yeah, and there are other things that can predispose someone to heart failure. Like if you get like tissue damage to the heart, like if you have a heart attack and that tissue doesn't fully recover, or like there's there's lots of case studies and things where people go through chemo and it damages heart tissue. And when that heart tissue is damaged, then the vortex doesn't act like it's supposed to, right? It's not vortexing as well. And so that can cause kind of stagnant flow through the heart because it's not vortexing like it's supposed to and moving things through the chambers of the heart like it's supposed to. But then also the blood's not being energized as well. So when it gets into the periphery, it doesn't form the structured water as well. And unless someone's in that environment, like tons of infrared light and grounding and things like that, then you're really going to struggle from that damaged heart tissue. So that can predispose you to heart. But that's the other thing that kind of made people think, oh, it's the heart failing. Oh, there's damage to the heart. Heart's failing. We develop heart failure. But in reality, the heart is not, it is, I guess, kind of failing in the sense that it's not structuring things as well, but it's not because it's not pumping as well. It's because it's the structured water mechanisms or the vortexing mechanisms have become insufficient, which is leading to downstream effects, in addition to not being in these environments to create structured water. So, yeah.
And we live, that's a good point, is that heart attacks might be just happening more, heart failure might be happening more because we live such predominantly indoor lives. We're not getting infrared in our skin. There's all that narrative to avoid the sun and all of that. Not many people have an infrared sauna in their house or, saunas in their house and are using those regularly, So yeah, it's just those things should be utilized. But like the point is, if you want to have better heart health or better health overall, is to be outside and to expose your skin to natural sunlight, which always provides red light therapy, which I'm sure would also be something else to use. So red light therapy, if it's got the right wavelength, could also be supportive. But yeah, just expose your body to the sunlight every day. That sunlight is so important. And getting in the sauna if you want to utilize that too, if you have any issues. Or I use it because, heart disease does run in my family. Unfortunately, I do have a genetic predisposition to it. My grandfather died of a heart attack, So yeah, we've got a sauna. My parents have a sauna, thanks to Dr. Hussey teaching us about that, because that's important then for me to make sure that I do those practices, And it also makes me think about how, people think cholesterol is the problem, right? Is the major problem, of course, which it's not. But sunlight also helps deplete cholesterol, if I'm not mistaken, correct? Right. So if you're in sunlight, you're going to be depleting cholesterol in the right way, because it's used to make like all our steroid hormones like vitamin D and all of our sex hormones and all of that. So it's like, let's just go to the cholesterol area a little bit, because I think that when people talk to somebody about heart, they want to hear about that from you. So like, let's start with like the benefits of cholesterol, because I think cholesterol is so important for us to have enough cholesterol in our body. And if we don't have enough, our health is going to suffer. And we're taking a statin, that's we're not going to have enough cholesterol to do its major functions. And yeah, let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, cholesterol is a vitally important molecule. It wouldn't be there if it wasn't. The body wouldn't make a ton of it in the liver if it wasn't important, and it does every single day. It makes a ton of cholesterol, and it's used for communication between cells. It's used to for brain function and nerve health. It's used to make all your sex hormones. It's used to make vitamin D. It's used for cellular repair. I mean, it's literally used for so many different things, and so when we start aggressively lowering it with statins or PCSK9 inhibitors to various cholesterol lowering medications, we see the side effects. You deprive your body of this thing that it uses for lots of different stuff, and you're going to get sexual dysfunction, and you're going to get muscle pain, and you're going to get cognitive decline, and you're going to get diabetes because it's been shown to cause insulin resistance. It's actually been shown, statins have been shown to increase the amount of calcification of the lining of the artery. Calcification of plaque. So, and that's the reason they're kind of justifying them today. They're starting to, maybe it doesn't, it hasn't been shown to do much cardiovascular, but we're creating more stable plaque, which is less dangerous, which there's whole issues with that theory too. A lot of issues with it.
Oh, wow. That's a logic right there.
Yeah. So they're doing anything to justify the use of it because they want. Because it's like the number one prescribed medication. I think rosuvastatin is the number one prescribed medication. So they're making millions, probably billions on that prescription. So anyways, so it's very beneficial. But, just we have to step back and just think about this. I mean, obviously, there's the whole history of how cholesterol became blamed for heart disease. And there was, some bad science done by Ansel Keys, and there was a lot of money behind the theories from pharmaceutical companies, but also food companies that wanted to, program people with this narrative that saturated fat was bad, so they'd eat more sugar and grains and things, and they could sell more of that. There's a lot of money behind it, which is kind of how things go in a capitalist society. So that's unfortunate, but it is what it is. But if we just step back and think about it, like from a big picture point of view, the body is this very complex biological ecosystem. There's no way that one single metabolite or one set of metabolites like lipoproteins or lipids in the blood is driving a whole disease process, right? And so it just makes no sense. Why would they even be there? Like, if there's no situation where lipids just say, you know what, today I'm going to go embed myself into the lining of the artery. Today's the day, right? It just doesn't do that. There always has to be some predisposing factor. And even then, even if there's damage to the lining of the artery, which is that predisposing factor, lipids still don't just go embed themselves in the lining of it. They may get stuck there because they happen to be there. But the majority of atherosclerosis is clotting tissue. It's not these accumulations of cholesterol. Like, it's clotting tissue. And then, yes, they provide, they prescribe medications that lower cholesterol, but they also prescribe you a bunch of blood thinners. Why? Because they're scared of clotting. They're not scared of these lipids that induce clotting, because there's no evidence that lipids induce clotting. They also, like, when they busted up the clot that formed in my arteries, they used enzymes that bust up clotting. They didn't use enzymes that bust up cholesterol or metabolize lipids because it was clotting material. So that's what we're at. We're trying to prevent clotting. That's what we should really be focusing on. And it's a really fascinating paper, which we can talk about this if you want, but called The Myth of the Vulnerable Plaque, that shows that even when plaques do form and they rupture, they don't cause heart attacks. And the conclusion of the authors of this paper, when they looked at all this evidence for this stenosis theory of heart disease, or narrowing of an artery, they concluded that we need to be paying attention to clotting factors. Like this lipids and metabolism is kind of can be a contributor. Like if you're insulin resistant, which is what lipids show. When we analyze lipids that show us a profile of insulin resistance, yes, atherosclerosis is worse, but that doesn't predict a heart attack. Clotting factors predict heart attacks. So all these guys that have projected the paradigm of lipids causing heart disease, that's great, but they're still focused on analyzing lipids in a way that tell us what will cause heart attacks, and they're never going to find it, ever. They're stuck in this theory. And so that's what Einstein said. You can't solve your problems with the same level of thinking that created the problem.
Yeah.
You have to have a new level of thinking, and that's what this circadian or quantum aspect of things. So if we talk about that from a quantum aspect, I mean, this is the post I just did on Sunday. It was like, Virchow's triad was back in the 1800s, and it's still accepted as what causes clotting today. It's endothelial damage, it's clumping of elements of blood, and it's poor blood flow. Those things are what predispose someone to clotting. And you could also have increasing clotting factors like thrombin and prothrombin and platelets and things like that. So that's what we want to do. We want to prevent damage to the lining of the artery. We want to keep things in blood evenly spaced, and we want to keep blood moving. And I already told you how structured water keeps blood moving, right? But when structured water forms in the lining of the artery, it also forms an impenetrable barrier that protects the lining of the artery. That's why they call it exclusion zone water. It's another name for it. And then also we know that structured water forms on other biological surfaces in the blood, the elements of blood, red blood cells, proteins, lipoproteins, things like that. We get this zeta potential structured water that forms around it. And that zeta potential also forms that barrier that protects it and then keeps it from clumping up to everything else in the blood. So structured water in the vascular system keeps blood moving, it protects the lining of the artery, and it stops things from clumping. So it's pretty useful. I don't care what your LDL is. If you have structured water in your artery and it's healthy and things are moving, then you're never going to clot, right? And and so that's one thing that I was missing as far as my heart attack was that I had accepted this idea that the LDL wasn't causing heart disease. A CAC score is 0, good metabolic health, everything's going good, still had a heart attack. Why? Because I wasn't paying attention to those things that increase structured water, and I put myself under a lot of stress. Well, I didn't intentionally do it, but it happened. We mentioned off air a little bit, may have been some oxalate dumping. Under that stress, blood sugars were fluctuating. And then in that state, in that acute stress state, because I got very bad news a day and a half before I had the heart attack, and I couldn't do anything about that news. We were just kind of a waiting game to see, what was going to happen. I tried to do the same workout that I usually do, which is a very intense kind of HIIT training workout. And then 15 minutes after the workout, once my body had kind of calmed down, clot formed because of this acute inflammation. And it happens most in the coronary arteries because they're under the most pressure of any artery, especially the left anterior descending artery, which is where mine happened. And the vast majority of heart attacks happen in that artery because it's under a high amount of pressure. So you put more pressure, you put more damage to it, it's more likely you're going to induce clotting. They usually happen in areas where there's a curve in the artery, because that can create, if anybody's ever had a curve in a pipe in a house, clotting is more like things get stuck there, right? Then we get this, turbulent flow. And so that's what's happening. So, yeah. And if I believe that if I had been doing things to increase more structured water, like perhaps if I had, after that workout, just stood outside on the ground, who knows if it would have happened? I don't know if that would have been enough in that situation, or outside in the sun on the ground, but I wasn't, I was inside cooking
and you can't
lunch or
look
something.
back and be
Right.
like,
But it's just like, those are the things that, like, if I had been doing that stuff more, would it have happened? And but at this point, would it have mattered? I don't know, or it doesn't matter now because I can't go back and change it. But it's just, it completely, when you learn this and you see how it works and you learn about how the body works and how the body is just trying to increase charge so that it can build that structured water, then all these other theories, it's this very myopic biochemistry cholesterol theory. It's just, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't even make sense. And the only way it's a contributor is that you're assessing metabolism. And if your metabolism is off, you're insulin resistant, which if you get damage to the lining of the artery, insulin resistant will predispose you to not being able to repair that damage, creating more atherosclerosis. That's why it's relevant, because you're assessing metabolism. But as far as clotting, it's not going to tell you much about anything ever.
Right. Because it's more, heart disease is more of a metabolic disorder as well. Right. So it's like, right. Am I saying that correctly?
Well, yeah. But the metabolic part of it is just that insulin resistance causes a lot of issues, which you could have leptin resistance way before that.
Yes.
But insulin resistance causes issues in that your body, because insulin it does a lot of things, but it's the main thing that triggers growth and repair. So if you're resistant to that insulin, you are not going to trigger growth and repair, which means, like, because the endothelia first, if it gets damaged, it starts to proliferate and build a bigger layer of protection. because there's no structured water on it. There's no glycocalyx anymore. So now it's trying to just build more cells. So that proliferation is protection, that growth. But then the repair of it is also there. And that the repair of an endothelial cell doesn't happen if you're insulin resistant, which is why we see this heavy association with diabetes. Well, type 2 diabetes. Type 1, you aren't insulin resistant. But type 2, you are. And that is why we see this more atherosclerosis with that. But all that stuff is very metabolic stuff, metabolic issues in the body, which are a problem. But those are not the things that are causing acute heart attack situations. And even if that diabetes causes more atherosclerosis and we get this narrowing or stenosis of an artery, those narrowing or stenoses are not causing heart attacks either, which we can go down that hole if you want to as well. But yeah, so kind of different things, metabolic versus clotting, both contributors, but one way more than the other.
Seems like I think what I'm grasping is that it's an electromagnetic failure, like your redox or maybe it's not redox, but your energetic potential decreased, and then your body couldn't do what it needed to do to prevent the clotting. Is that how I'm hearing you?
Yeah. So taking it back to infrared light being this wonderful thing that structures water, we're all here, all life on Earth is here because of the energy from our star, which is the sun. Nothing else would be here. So all life is designed in many ways, shapes, and forms to harvest that energy from the sun. When you eat food, you're harvesting energy that the plant stored from the sun in that food. But that's not the only way we get energy. And so we're designed to get this energy in the form of electrons, and every person who studies cellular physiology learns that we have an electron transport chain, right? So that's how one of the ways our body makes energy, but we can get electrons from many different other sources or many other ways in the body. And that's your body trying to get that redox potential, which is a net negative charge, is what you want. We all learn in cellular physiology, again, that the cell has a net negative charge. And we're told that it's because there's a high concentration of proteins in the cell, which is, but there's a high concentration of proteins that are surrounded by negatively charged structured water in your cells. And so your body's trying to keep and maintain this net negative charge so that it can build structured water to maintain that net negative charge. And it has to have energy to do that. The energy can come in the form of infrared light, it could come in the form of electrons directly from the earth, lots of different ways. So taking it back to that. So when we have a tissue that's breaking down, it's because it lacks charge, ultimately. The big picture explanation is it's lacking charge because our body is not in the right situation to get that charge. And the reason we have poor metabolism is because our body's trying to get enough charge from the food because it's not getting it from elsewhere. And so that forces our body to alterate these things in metabolism. We're burning the wrong fuel sources. We're burning tons of carbs, which can be inflammatory, like processed carbs, trying to create enough energy for that system to happen. But it's not. And so when the body starts to break down, starts to lose its charge, the first place that suffers is the vascular system or just any fluid system, because that's the first line of defense. The gut and the vascular system are the places where your body's trying to filter and get through everything, all these damaging things that we're doing to it. And so that's what suffers, is the charge there in those areas. And that's why we see damage to them first. People have gut damage and vascular damage like crazy. It's the first thing that shows up, all because we're lacking charge, not because we're, metabolically unhealthy, which is not good, but because ultimately we're lacking charge. And the metabolic unhealthy part is coming from diet, for sure. People are eating these processed carbs and things, but it's also coming from the wrong light environment. Your whole lipid and metabolic, or your whole metabolism is driven on a circadian clock. And if that's off, then you're going to have all kinds of issues with disruption of your metabolism, which is then contributing to that insulin resistance and then the diabetes, and that's furthering atherosclerosis. And you have this low net negative charge, which means interferes with structured water in the vascular system, which again promotes the likelihood of clotting because blood's not moving, it's clumping together, and the artery is not protected. So it all kind of makes sense. It's this paradigm that kind of links everything together. It's all light, whether it's circadian versus electrons, it's all light, which makes sense because we're all here because of light.
Sorry, the history of heart disease, it all corresponds with that or aligns with that, right? the heart disease, the rates of illness of heart issues correspond to the lifestyle changes, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you look in like the early 1900s, there was no real field of cardiology. There was no like American Cardiology Association. There was no cardiologist really. There's a few doctors that were like interested in the heart, but it wasn't a thing. And it wasn't really until after World War II when it started to become a real big issue, which, things started changing as far as like more circadian disruption, more vegetable oils, which are very inflammatory, damaging the lining of the artery. And then more and more people start go to indoor living, right? We're out of touch with the earth. We're out of touch with natural light. I don't know when the first LED was invented, but somewhere during that time, it was very soon after that that's when this drastic change happened. Heart disease skyrockets. This is what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All those changes is what's caused it. I mean, really, if heart disease didn't exist the way we lived a couple hundred years ago, right? We need to go backwards to go forwards. It's just, yeah, it's just, I'm so glad you brought up light too, of course, because we talk about that immensely on the podcast. And light is a huge driver of your metabolism, really, basically, and your whole physiology. So it's really so important. And of course, you said connecting to the earth, just so people know, Dr. Hussey is referring to like being outside grounding, putting your bare feet on the ground, touching the earth, putting your hands in the dirt, walking on the beach, all of those kinds of things. Well, all that, just taking a walk on the beach is going to improve your heart health. Take that away, because it's so important, just to
Yeah.
go, just to live in accordance with nature and just to be connected and to be outside. All of that is not only improves your overall health, but your heart health immensely. So it's just so huge.
Yeah. I mean, we have direct evidence that grounding increases
Yeah.
zeta potential on red blood cells, which is going to decrease their likelihood to aggregate and clot. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we have plenty of research that suggests that. It makes total sense though, because that's where humans were for the majority of times humans have been on Earth.
Right.
Outside.
We didn't have shoes, a couple, 100 years
or
ago.
if we did, it was just like a natural substance that still allowed you to, like leather shoes, like from an animal hide or something like that. Like that would still conduct.
Yeah. If you haven't,
rubber sole shoes is a problem.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So if you haven't looked it up, like, take a look at a picture of you can see pictures of the red blood cells right online distinctly before and after grounding, and you can see how clumped they are and then how much they're flowing after grounding. I mean, it's the research is there, it's very, very, very concrete research that you can look at. So yeah, you have any issues with that, definitely that's going to be a huge, and grounding, I prefer grounding, real grounding outside in nature, that's where we should be grounding. Hopefully away from non-native EMFs if possible. When you're away from those environments, spend more time grounding when you're at beaches or parks or, forests and things like that, where there's not a lot of, other non-native EMFs to interfere as well. So yeah, it's really, really important. So yeah, you chatted a little bit about exercise. I don't know if you want to just, what exercise you feel like is the best for heart health. I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah. Yeah, I get a lot of flack for this from like super athletes and stuff, but like I don't think that excessive intense exercise is good for us. Whether that's, like I have no problem with CrossFit, but like I think it's overdone. And people try and push themselves too much. And running a marathon, I don't think is healthy for anybody. There are some people that can genetically do it a lot, but you don't need to exercise that much to be healthy. If you like literally, I spend probably 15 minutes in the gym twice a week. And eventually I'm going to be able to, have that set up in my garage so I can open the garage door and do it under natural light
Awesome.
one day. But yeah, like all I have to do go in there and tell my body that it wasn't good enough, which is one set to failure, sometimes two sets, and then I'm out. Like, that's how you can build muscle that quick. And then I'm active during the day. I'm fortunate that I'm a chiropractor and I'm adjusting people. I'm up and I'm using my body. But and then, I'm always walking, trying to go hiking, but that's pretty much it. You don't need to be this crazy bodybuilder or marathoner or CrossFitter to be healthy. And matter of fact, I think that there can be downsides to it. as far as like, especially in marathoning, like that amount of stress, like marathoners have been shown to have way more plaque buildup in their arteries over their lifetime. And these are like real excessive marathoners. Like if someone wants to do it because they just want to do it as a life goal of theirs, yeah, go for it. It's probably not going to be that dangerous, but like, a chronic lifetime of over exercising is not great for us. Unless you have some reason to be, like you're a pro athlete or something like that, and you get paid lots of money to do it. Like just understand that it's, that there's, I guess, risk to things, long term. But the other thing is that, you know, the goal is health, right? The goal is not to be the best workout, the best at working out, or the best, the fastest. I mean, you could have personal goals like that, but if you really want to focus on health, it doesn't take that much physical activity to achieve the level of health that you want. Like I couldn't go run even a 5K at this point. I mean, I could probably do it, but it would be hard for me because I don't train that way. I don't think that you need to have that level of fitness to be healthy. If you want it, fine, but just pay attention to these other things too. The grounding and the light and all those sorts of things, because that's what's going to protect your arteries. And you got people, running on treadmills under artificial light for 30 minutes to an hour. And, the metabolism is never gonna, like, you're never gonna lose weight that way, because that cardio exercise is not how you do it. You fix your metabolism through eating at the right times and getting light at the right times. That's going to fix your metabolism. It's all based on the circadian clock. So if you want to lose weight, that's the way to do it. It's not this over exercising. So we have to have it totally backwards, right? We're trying to get all of our energy from food rather than other sources. So we end up overeating calories. And then we're trying to lose weight by over exercising, which is creating more damage to our body. When in reality, it's just our light and our eating timing is off. If we fix those things, then you don't have to be as active. You should still be active. Like we're designed to be up and moving and not sitting all day, but it doesn't have to be this crazy excessive exercise. And I think that that's something that I think I'm seeing it a lot more, like on like in influencers and Instagram and just out there. It's just like you don't have to over exercise. And I see people struggling, like they're trying so hard to lose weight, and I see them like, and they look miserable on that treadmill, or I see them running on the road and they're just like, they look miserable. I'm like, you don't have to do this. You could just walk, and that's just as good for you. So yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with
Energetic
everything.
perspective. You got to look at it from an energetic perspective, right? And evolutionarily, they weren't running marathons, they weren't doing weightlifting, they were doing things to live. But you also don't want to tax your body beyond what its energetic potential is. Then you're really creating problems. I know we're coming up on the hour, so I just wanted to make sure that we're staying on track of that, or on top of that. And what is it you're working on now, and where do you see yourself going, career-wise, as far as your interests and what you want to be bringing out into the world?
Yeah. I've gotten, well, I mean, I've always been kind of interested in pain because I'm a chiropractor and that's what people come to me for, but I'm working on a book about pain and have been diving into that a lot recently. And I'm I'm working on that, and then obviously still posting on social media and stuff, but I'm also working on trying to do as much speaking as possible, especially to chiropractors. I want to bring this information to chiropractors. I feel like, you know, I don't want to sound like negative or whatever, but I've been disappointed with what chiropractors know versus don't know, and and their views on things as far as like what creates metabolism. Because I think that Western medicine is failing us, and people are going to look elsewhere. And I want to equip my profession as people that could be receiving on the receiving end of those people that have been disappointed by Western medicine. So I'm really working on that to get out there and speak to other chiropractors. But yeah, that's like kind of what I'm working on. Those two things right now. Maybe some courses in the future, but that won't be till after the book is done.
We'll be excited to check that one out. It'd be awesome. Yeah. So I guess as we're coming to the end, let's talk like last thing, like just leave the listeners with like lifestyle practices that you think are the best things that they should be doing. I know you've mentioned them a little bit here, but just maybe like reinforce that again at the end. Like, what are the best things that they can do for their heart health, their health in general, to add into their daily practice?
Yeah. Well, I end a lot of podcasts like this because I think it's really important, because lots of times people get to the podcast and they're like, oh, that was so much information. I don't know what to do. Like, there's all these things on this list. Oh man, look how many things I got to do. How do I know if it's working or not working, or if it's good for me or not? Because people get confused by all the conflicting information out there. And what I want to, kind of tell people is that you should focus on, like, when you're thinking about some modality or a food or anything really, or just a lifestyle practice, think about it in the context of what is real versus not real, right? So what is this man-made thing versus this real thing? Because humans and all of the species that came before humans, the only thing they knew were the earth, right? And what the earth came with. It came with the earth itself. It came with natural light, came with only unprocessed natural food you'd find in nature. So it's like you got to think about it in the context of those things. Now, I don't expect people to go out and live in nature. Again, we have to do this within the context of our modern world. But if you're looking at something in the grocery store and you see a steak versus, I don't know, something processed
On
or
burger.
even, yeah, or Beyond Burger. Yeah. And you look at the ingredients and you're just like, okay, which one's more real? Like, this one came from a real animal. It's just basically you cut it out of an animal and, there it is. That's what it is, right? This is, I'm not even sure what this is. It's vegetable oils, it's pea protein, it's all these processed things. That's not real. That's a hyper reality created by humans. That's not something that humans ever would have eaten. Or you could think about it, light, artificial light. From the screen I'm looking at here, like I've got the blue light turned way down and everything, but like it's still artificial light compared to the window I have open right here, the light coming in. That's real light. That's the only light that, life ever knew forever. So that's real. All this, the concrete and the rubber soled shoes, like that's blocking your real attachment to the earth so that your body knows where it is, right? And so do things within your modern lifestyle that recreate this real environment. Ask yourself what is real versus what's a hyper reality. You could do the same thing with blood work. I feel amazing. My blood work says that I should be sick, but I feel amazing. Okay, well, what's more real? It doesn't mean that we can't use blood work and there's not things on blood work that can tell us if something's really wrong. We need to intervene, but it's still a hyper reality. It's a measurement of one tissue, of one snapshot in time. It doesn't take into account all the changes your body is doing and how well it's adapting to changes. Like, so we have to take those things into account and ask ourselves what's more real, what's not. To just use that context to kind of dictate how you move forward and decide what you're going to do. Is this a real relationship or just a superficial one? Do I feel this person is just using me or not really interested in my well-being? And so, like, I'm not saying that, all these superficial relationships we may have online can't be beneficial or things we gain from those, but we still need those handful of people that we have, have that real relationship, that really have our back. Those people we need to and maintain those relationships and focus on those more than these other superficial ones that we're creating through technology and things like that, which we get information from, but shouldn't be the basis of our relationships. So just things like that. I mean, you could apply it to every aspect of life.
I love that. And it's like this simplistic beauty that's so profound, because also it requires us to be more in connection with our bodies, more in touch with our bodies, because you can't always, your mind will confuse you. So staying attuned to what feels good, right? What really feels deeply nourishing. And if you listen, your body's going to help you, and your heart will help you to discern that. Yeah.
Yep. That's why life is still here after billions of years, because it learned what made it feel good and to do that rather than something else. And we made it.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hopefully we'll continue to make it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't think people realize that health can be that simple, as just it can be that simple. Just simplify things. You don't need all these gadgets and all these things. You just go with what's real, people. That's a great way to end the podcast. I love that. So we thank you so much, Dr. Hussey, for coming on. We appreciate you so much sharing your wisdom today. And just where can people find you if they want to continue to keep learning from you? I mean, of course, get this amazing book. Okay, that's one thing you can do to learn more about Dr. Hussey's work, but where else can they find you?
My website is resourceyourhealth.com. And there's various ways to, my blog's on there. my books and products I recommend, and my health coaching is through there. So people can find me there, on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. Well, I guess it's X now, whatever. I don't really do much on that. Is Dr. Stephen Hussey, Dr. Stephen Hussey. People can follow me there. And yeah, my books are on Amazon, or you can go directly to the publisher website if you don't want to use Amazon, which I understand. So, which is Chelsea Green Publishing. Yeah, people can find me in different ways.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I know you're going to continue to keep sharing amazing stuff and spread the word. So yeah, thank you again.
Thank you
Of
so
course.
much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.